Official. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Business Agility Meetup New Zealand, or Business Agility New Zealand Meetup. We're so excited to have you here this morning. Thank you for taking the time, and you picked a good one. So we have Gareth Holebrook with us today, going to talk to us about intent-based leadership. Now, been lucky enough to know Gareth for years and work with him, and I was lucky enough to meet David Marquet when he was here a couple months back. I really believe in this program. I believe, I've read all the books, but Gareth is the expert, and he is the person in New Zealand to go to when you want this kind of coaching, this leadership coaching. It is a new way of working and leading and thinking. And Gareth has been doing this a long time as well. So I don't think he needs such a grand introduction. Most of us know him and have seen his work. So I am going to just turn it over to Gareth, and welcome and thank you again. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you, everybody, for turning up today. Let me just play the slideshow. So just to confirm, can you all see the slideshow with David and intent-based leadership? Good. And I'm hoping I've got the audio set as well. So what I would like to do today is share with you some ideas from David, predominantly from his new book, Leadership is Language. Now, if you know his history, which I'll quickly go through in a moment, it's about how he had a social experiment on a submarine. And sometimes people say, well, that's all good and well in a submarine. It's a controlled environment. You're the captain. You have no external influence. You can control, and everyone's within a few hundred meters of each other. How does that apply to the workplace? Well, a lot of what he's discovered does apply. And so we've got some principles that I'll share with you. And from that, hopefully practices that you could implement today, this afternoon. And also notice patterns of language and behavior that have beneficial and dysfunctional impact on the teams. So it says here, from the submarine to the workplace. I think the meetup said principles to practices. So it's going to ultimately, I hope you can walk away with practices you can use. I'm going to start with 3 different case studies. One where somebody was made to look like a fool in front of millions of people, but nobody died. And one where many people died, a ship sank. It was a really sad story, but the same effects was the different effects was from the same cause. So we'll talk through those, and then I'll talk to you about intent-based leadership itself. So as Beth said, through this, I'm probably going to make reference to YouTube videos, definitely some books. Don't feel pressure to make notes of them, because I'll share some show notes at the end. And I've also got a free supplement as a PDF that I can share out with everybody. And if you're really keen, I've got a little booklet here. It will cost you a cup of coffee and to meet me in person. I'll give you one of these books, which is a summary and a playbook of everything that David's done so far. So with that being said, this video, I'm going to assume most of you have at least seen the 10-minute video of David's story of the Santa Fe. And a funny story, about 18 months ago, I was working for a client as an enterprise coach, and I was interviewing for some agile coaches there, or we call them Kaizen coaches. And in passing, I mentioned that I worked with David, and his eyes lit up, and he said, "Oh yes, turn the ship around. I intend to." Great. So obviously that won him some points, and in the end, we hired him, and I think he's a great agile coach. But within the first few weeks, I was in a meeting with some engineers, and they got locked into this analysis paralysis discussion. And I said, "Look, you can see how they've been locked into blue work there." And he looked back at me with a vacant stare. And I said, "Red work, blue work." "What?" And I said, "Well, you've read Leadership is Language." And he went, "Ah." I said, "You read Turn the Ship Around?" He went, "Nah, but I've seen the video." And I'm not saying everybody's like that, but we're all time poor, and many people will have seen the video. A lot of people have read his first book, but his language book, I think, is most impactful. So for those who haven't seen the video or read any of the books, a summary of who David is. He was top of his class at university, went to the Navy Academy, real maths geek, and he ended up captaining his own ship. And then he got to be selected to be captain of the USS Olympia, which was a early version of the Los Angeles attack submarine, the nuclear submarine SSBN. He spent a year learning everything about that sub, the dossiers on all of his officers. He knew every single valve and pipe on board that ship. And then within a few weeks before joining the ship, he went to Hawaii, and his boss, an admiral, said, Marquet, we have a problem. The captain of the worst performing ship in the fleet, the Santa Fe, has just suddenly left. And so that submarine is without a captain. So you're not going to the Olympia, you're going to the Santa Fe. Now, that was all of a sudden he was very scared. And he wasn't scared because he was going on a new submarine. He was scared because he didn't know everything. So he couldn't give all of the commands. And there was an event where he gave an incorrect command and people followed his order. And he suddenly realized then that he had to shift his way of thinking and his way of leading. And the Navy had taught him to know everything and tell everything in leadership. And so he created this new model. And within a year, the Santa Fe was the highest performing ship in the history of the US Navy. So what did he do? He codified this with Stephen Covey. He created the ladder of leadership. And then when he left the Navy 10 years later, he wrote the book, Turn the Ship Around. And for the last 10 years has been consulting and working with psychologists and organizational behaviorists around the world. And I joined him 4 years ago with intent-based leadership. So what we're talking about now is how he's applied his story on the Santa Fe and how it's been applied now in industry. So I'm hoping that you will find relevance to everything we talk about today. So that was quite an extensive introduction. There's David Marquet. This is his new book, Leadership is a Language, was published in 2020 and highly recommended. But today we're going to cover the high level of that book. What does intent mean? Well, here's a model. It's actually, I was looking at it last night and I was thinking very similar to OKRs, where you have the objectives and key results from the organization, and then we get a two-way conversation with the people doing the work. And my experience is there's always a chasm between the people setting the strategy and the people doing the work. And there's a knowledge gap, and then it's hard to govern because the communication isn't flowing well. This is especially the case in larger organizations. And while OKRs go a long way to addressing this, this is not a process or a structure or a system. It's more about our behavior patterns to narrow that gap, to lower the gradient of power. So when we have an emergent strategy, we can then tend to build that intent from the organization through to the leader, and then understand from the people doing the work what their tactical intent is, what decisions they're making, and how that passes through. So that's ultimately the definition of what I'm talking about when I talk about intent. It's born very much on mission command. And if you've read Stephen Bungay's Art of Action, and he talks about von Moltke back in the Prussian army 200 years ago, this is how the military strategists used to work. It's called maneuver warfare and mission command. And this is where it's born out of. So this is not new at all. So here's the first case study, the Oscars. Who won the Oscars this year? Who knows who won the Best Picture for Oscars? Somebody chirp up who won the Oscars, if anyone's got your camera on, or you want to put it on the chat channel. Does anyone? I can't see the chat channel. Beth, could you read out the chats? What has anyone got? Who Best Picture was?
No one is fessing up.
No one's fessing up. Right. Well, it was Oppenheimer. Right. The next question is, who was Best Actress this year? Who knows that? Anyone? No? It's easier when I'm in person. Usually people chirp up a lot more. It was Emma Stone who won Best Actress. Next question is, when did Emma Stone last win Best Actress? It was in 2017 for La La Land. 2017, who won Best Picture? Let's find out, shall we? Let's play this.
And the Academy Award for Best Picture.
You're impossible. Come on. La La Land. La La Land has
Let it run for
14
another minute or
Oscar
so.
nominations this year and is tied for the most nominated movie in Oscar history, winning 7 Oscars: production design, cinematography, original score, song, directing, actress, and Best Picture.
Thank you all. Thank you to the Academy. Thank you to Lionsgate. Thank you to our incredible cast and crew. We're all up here right now.
Matt Pluff, you kicked this off, and Damien Chazelle, we're standing on your shoulders. We lost, by the way, but you know.
Guys, I'm sorry. No, there's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
Moonlight won. Come on, this is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
I think you guys should keep it anyway.
Okay, I can. I'll share that whole video with you. It's a comedy of errors. Let's just go back to this bit here. If I just scroll back. Here. Oh yeah, that's the best part. So we're gonna ask what's on Warren Beatty's mind just at that point. But before we do, let me give you some backstory. So Warren Beatty, Faye Dunaway. It was the 30th anniversary for them winning Best Picture for Bonnie and Clyde. So they thought they'd bring them back to announce the award in 2017. In rehearsal, there was a bit of tension between the two, and they couldn't agree who was going to read and the Best Picture and who was going to read who the winner is. And apparently, I think Faye Dunaway stormed off, and it was a mess. But what actually happened on the day of the awards is there's only 2 sets of cards with the answers. Now that I know there's probably a handful of consultants here, I'm going to guess or hope that there's no PwC consultants here because this is embarrassing for PwC. So it's stage left, stage right, same stack of cards. And as the announcers come on, they would rotate between the two. There would be a PwC consultant who would give them the card and then throw a card underneath and then give a card. Make sure that there's 2 sets of cards. A redundancy there, nice and safe, nothing can go wrong. What did go wrong, though, was Emma Stone won Best Actress. And as she came off, the consultant, young lad, as you would, asked for a selfie with Emma Stone. Why wouldn't you? But the problem is, while he was having a selfie with her, he forgot to flip the card over and he gave Emma Stone to Warren Beatty as he walked on. And you can see here what's going through Warren Beatty's mind. And you can see he looks down at the card, he looks up, he looks down again, he looks in to see if there's another card. It didn't seem to compute with him. He said something wrong here because it said Emma Stone and then that La La Land when it should have just said La La Land or Moonlight. Then you see him look backstage and you can see there was an anxiety in his face. Now we don't know what was going through his mind. We can only speculate. But I'm going to ask the question, 3 questions. And if you want to put this on chat channel, and Beth, if you wouldn't mind just reading them out because I can't see the chat line. 3 questions. What's on Warren's mind? What was he thinking when he saw that card? And it didn't seem right. He had that gut feeling this is the wrong card. Then you saw that Faye Dunaway said, "You're impossible." And then he just gave her the card and said, "You read it then." What's the chance that that card was ever going to be wrong? What's the probability that the card would ever be wrong? And the third thing is, what's in the way of him stopping, saying, "Hey, everybody, I want to stop the Oscars. This is the wrong card." Why didn't he do that? So just for a moment, if you can hop on the chat channel and tell me what you think happened. Why did this happen? And whose fault was it? And why did this happen? Got any?
Just waiting for the chat to get active here. So Paul says, "I know this is wrong, but it's written down."
Yeah, that's my job.
Yeah.
I'm just doing my job. I'm paid to read the card. If it's the wrong card, I don't care. I'm still getting paid.
He didn't want to look stupid by stopping the ceremony, even though he thought something was wrong.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Warren was thinking, I must be wrong, even though what I'm seeing is not what I expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So think about a 2x2. It's false positive, false negative, true positive, true negative. So there's an event where this is the right card, and I'm going to read it. Everyone's happy. This is the wrong card, and I stop the proceedings, and everyone goes, phew, thank you very much. And then there's the other two, the false positive, false negative. If he stopped proceedings and it was the right card, he would look like an idiot. And that's what he was trying to do. He was prevented from that social outcasting of stopping the Oscars when it's all on a clock and looking like an idiot. So he didn't want to stop it, because the other thing is not stopping it, and it was the wrong card, which is where he went. That was less embarrassing, and at least he had a bit more time. So he was driven by a clock ticking, and he couldn't stop the clock. He couldn't pull the andon cord, and he had that. He didn't want to be a false negative. That would be, in his mind, the worst thing. So he ended up not making a decision and letting the procedure flow. And he was probably looking at it thinking, well, how could this possibly be wrong? This has never happened before. And I don't have a system in place to prevent this. There's no andon cord for me to pull. So ultimately, that's the challenges. So what's in the way? Fear. Fear of looking like a fool. Stress. It's a stressful situation. There was also some interactions between Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, which didn't help. He didn't have the authority to stop the proceedings. That wasn't in his job description. His job description was put on a tux, turn up, look good, read the card, get off stage. There was no separation of authority from information. There was a separation of authority from information. Got an echo going on there, Camilla. And there's an absence of a mechanism. So Camilla, can I ask you to mute, please? You got a double thing going. There was an absence of a mechanism to stop the proceedings, so we weren't making decisions ahead of time what we would do in this event, and it never happened before. So I'm not going to blame any person, but there was a systemic failure. Well, maybe that PwC guy, he can take a ribbing, but nobody else really. We can't blame anybody for this. It was a structure and a system that failed. Now, who cares? It's only the Oscars. It was nobody died. It was just Warren Beatty made to look an idiot, but who cares? I don't. But the problem is, this same pattern of events happened on BP's Deepwater Horizon back in 2010. And in that case, people did die. There was an ecological disaster and BP lost billions of dollars. And it was the same thing. The people who had the authority, the people who had the information closest to the rig, saw that there was an impending problem, and they didn't crash stop all of the valves, which you can do. There's a big red button you can hit and it just switches off everything. And had they made that decision fast enough, it would have prevented it going up, it would have prevented people dying, and it would have prevented the mass carnage afterwards. So the Oscars is quite trivial. Deepwater Horizon, obviously quite severe. And in David's book, Leadership is Language, the big case study he talks about is the El Faro. El Faro, it's a 31,000-ton container ship. It used to do the milk run from Jacksonville down to in Florida down to San Juan in Puerto Rico. The crew of 33, very experienced. The captain, very experienced. Everybody knew this. It left Jacksonville 28th of September. This is 2015. And then a tropical storm started to emerge when it left. I think it was Category 1. And then it became a Category 3, Category 4. And the ship sank. And everybody died. Now, they had an option of taking a longer route through the Old Bahama Channel. Shipping companies don't make money when they're sailing. They only make money when they leave port or when they enter port, when they pick things up and deliver them. So there is a pressure to get there more quickly. And going the longer way takes more fuel and it takes longer. So there's a commercial imperative to take the shortcut. Here's the view of what happened. The yellow line is the direction, the straight line from Jacksonville to Puerto Rico. And as Storm Joaquin started to emerge, the captain, we've got actually the 24-hour sequence of events up until it's sinking. The captain was in his bunk And it could have gone, that black dotted line is the room key channel. And the crew could have taken a turn to starboard, gone down that room key channel. It was a decision point that they passed. And it's the same thing as Warren Beatty. They didn't feel they had the authority to make that decision. They phoned the captain up to his cabin, and they didn't give him the warning of the storm to the extent that he felt it was a challenge. So they carried on, and then a few hours later they sank. Again, who do we blame? Do we blame the crew for not speaking up? Do we blame the captain for creating the environments? Well, when you read the book, there's a lot of things that happened which were out of the control of the crew, and the captain didn't feel psychologically safe with the shipping company. But we can also identify it in the language that the captain used. And we'll go back to some of the phrases that the captain used and what he could have used and what he could have done in advance to create an environment where the crew could have said, hey, captain, we've got a problem. We're going to take the room key channel. And him say, right, you are, trust what you're doing, off you go. That didn't happen. And there's ways we can change that. So in your context, you're not running the Oscars and you're not on a life and death. Most people are not in a life and death situation. But this inability to make decisions and feel safe about standing up to the captain is something that we can all feel on a daily basis. And as leaders, there's things we can do to mitigate that. So let's talk about intent-based leadership and how this can help. So here's a radio factory. This is Philadelphia, 1930s. Interestingly, my first job out of the Navy, I worked in a factory just like this. That was 94. And I counted this picture. There's about 100 people here. And you'll see most people are workers. They're doing the work, they're executing. And there's only one person I can see who's doing any thinking. And it's on the left. You can see the guy with the waistcoat on. He's a draftsman, maybe a foreman, engineer, supervisor, don't know. But he's probably a thinker, and everyone else is a doer. And traditionally, we would separate the thinkers and the doers. And you could probably look at the job descriptions of both of them and see lots of thinking in one JD and lots of doing in the other. So the thinkers execute, deliver, produce, consistency, standard, all of those things, standard operating procedures. And the blue is all decide, discuss, plan, develop, choose. And I'm guessing in your organization, you can have a look at your JD and the JD of people you interact with, and you may see that dichotomy of red and blue. And quite bluntly, let's call this red work and blue work. Red work and blue work. Now, I'm not here to discredit how industry worked 100 years ago. It worked really well with Frederick Taylor, with Henry Ford, and up until just after the Second World War was really useful, where we wanted to control variation in production. The point is today, many of us, most of us, are knowledge workers, and we need a mechanism to switch from red work to blue work. We need to consciously shift one to the other, because otherwise, if we get locked in red work, just doing the work, you're going to end up reading that Oscars card just because that's your job. And if you're locked in blue work, then you're going to be in analysis paralysis. So we need deliberate mechanisms to switch between the two. And we can also look at the way we talk. So that's the industrial age. We're now in the knowledge age. But if we, even in the knowledge age today, we still have language like leaders and followers, direct reports, all hands meeting. Why isn't it an all heads meeting? Because it's not the hands anymore, it's the people. We're thinking. We want to make decisions. And a can-do attitude. You never hear can-think attitude. And, you know, resources, that's my favorite. So how can we change this? Well, we need to analyze and look at the language in our organization. And this is one thing I do with David and the IBL team internationally. And before we get into that, so you can see an org structure here. At the top is all the people doing the thinking, and at the bottom, all the people doing the doing. And I think now it's got to be a blend between the two. A few years ago, I was working with Al Shalloway on value stream management. And those of you familiar with value streams know that the value goes left to right, but we manage top to bottom. And the inherent problem that Al Shalloway talked about was that every time you have to have a decision that you go up and down, there's a decision delay. And that causes delays within the value stream. So it reduces your ability to deliver value. And also, the greater the distance between the information and the decision, the less effective that decision is. And this is where Stanley McChrystal in Team of Teams talked about people in the Pentagon and Washington trying to make decisions for people in theater in Afghanistan and Iraq were so away from the decisions that they weren't making the right decisions, and the people who could have made the decisions were not authorized to do so. So we need to change that inherent problem to enable people to push the authority to make decisions at the work, at the Gemba, which is a Japanese phrase from Toyota. So, case study, we've been working with a lot of larger companies around the world. One is a nuclear power station in Florida. And we did an analysis of the meetings. We transcribed all of the meetings and the words, and also who said the words and the sentiments. And you can see on the left, this is when we first started with them, the blue, that was the most senior person in the room, and they did most talking. And then over time, you can see it tended towards on the right, where everybody gets to speak. There was a diversity in ideas. The most junior people were able to speak up, and if they can spot something, they felt safe to dissent and speak up and say, I don't feel safe, or I don't feel there's a high probability. And there's techniques we can use to transition from that pie chart on the left through to the pie chart on the right. But the first thing that you can take away is, as a leader, is try and speak last. And I say this to myself as much as everyone else here, because when I'm a leader, just by my nature, I tend to speak a lot and speak first. But what we want to try and do is speak last, because we can influence and anchor what other people think, and enable other people to speak amongst themselves and come back with ideas and intents. And then you become the decision evaluator, not the decision maker. So that's the first thing. The next thing is the sentiment and the language that we use. Same power plant. And we noticed that the managers were tending to use language which was more blue oriented, and the workers were tending to use more red oriented. So you could even look at the way they spoke to one another, and it was blue or red. And again, there's language that we can use as leaders. And when I say leaders, I'm not just talking about you and people reporting to you, but also where you are in the organization. You can speak up to your leader in blue language, and you can speak to your peers with blue language as well. So that's about decision making and probability, whereas red is all about determinism and process and control and variation. So that's the first thing. Be aware the language we're using, is it red or blue, and who's speaking, and try and enable a diversity and a shared share of voice. Google Aristotle Project picked this up as high performing teams had greater psychological safety, and that was measured by how much people spoke. Yeah, I love this picture. I see red people. And I see this when I go to organizations. You can see a lot of people, very senior, very well paid, thinking people whose role is to do, and you can see they're locked into red work. So let's go back to the captain of the El Faro. After the ship had sank, they picked up the flight recorder. Ships have flight recorders, and they had all of the conversations on the bridge for the entire voyage. And there was a commission of inquiry, and in that they went through all of who said to what to whom, and then therefore who was to blame or what was the cause. But then David went through all of the transcript for his book, and he picked up on language sentiment. So I'm going to pick out a few things. There was lots to pick out, obviously thousands of pages of this, but here's a few things that the captain said. What do you want to call this point waypoint? How about alpha? You know what I'm saying. So that's a binary self-affirming question. It's between these two, right? You feeling good about that now? This is all binary self-affirming. Does that make sense? Now apply this to your context. Are we going to ship on time this Friday? Is everything good? Are you happy? Any questions? All yes or no. They're not going to elicit conversation. They're just going to get a compliant nod of the head. And people don't feel safe to speak up. So actually, we felt it today. I asked, I don't know how many people are here now, 30, 50 people. I said, so what do you think? And we didn't get too much back. I know it's difficult when it's online, but how can we get it for people to feel safe and speak up and go, oh, well, Warren Beatty, obviously. So how can we ask questions to enable people to speak up? Here's a few examples of what we could do. What would you say would be a great name for this waypoint? How far does this reflect your view? What actions do we have? What options do we have? On a scale of 1 to 10, how clear is the current situation? So you'll notice the use of the word what. What is really good because it will generate divergence of conversation. Why, by the way, is a problem. So why did you do that is straightly quite confrontational and can cause people to close up and feel a threat response. But we want to think on probability and give people a sense that they can speak up and say, I'm only 80% on this or 60%. So I sometimes use probability cards to where people vote first and then we discuss, and you'll be familiar with planning poker, that's very similar. So those are the questions, expansive what questions. And in this book here, there's a whole range of different questions you can ask in the 7 sins of questioning. And it's actually in more depth in the main book. So be mindful of the kind of questions you ask, and therefore you'll stimulate the right kind of answer. Okay, so the last 10 years, David has been consulting with Intent-Based Leadership International, and what's emerged out of here is what we've seen are the 6 fundamental principles sat behind this. All of these have references to other research and other books that we've all read. We've got PhD psychologists in the team. We've got organizational behaviorists. Obviously, David's made this his life. And as a practicing consultant, I've contributed to this as well. So these principles have emerged out over the last few years. So you won't see this in any of his books, but it's part of the training that we do. The first is about pushing authority to the information. We've talked about this already. This is the Al Shalloway inherent problem. Give the people closest to the work the authority to make rapid tactical decisions. Now, here's a hazard, and this is where people misunderstand intent-based leadership, because you don't just go, ta-da, you're empowered, go forth and decide. We still need a mechanism to tune control to competency and clarity. If you're familiar with Dan Pink and his autonomy, mastery, and purpose, this aligns very closely with that and Ed Deasy's work in why we do what we do. So control is autonomy, competence is mastery, and clarity is purpose. And we tune it. So somebody brand new on the job, you're not just going to go ahead and work out what you need to do. You need to obviously have more control with less competent and less clear scenarios. But as you can improve the clarity of the organization and the competence of the people, you can staircase up. And there's a sweet spot. If you do it too rapidly, you're going to cause confusion and anxiety. And if you do it too slowly, you're going to cause frustration. So we need to tune that control, and that's our job as a leader. So that's all on organizational psychology. We need to make it safe. And this is Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, very much geared towards the medical sector, but still applies everywhere else. Actually, I've just read a new book about failure and how we embrace learning failure and what are good failures and what are not good failures. And we need to be in an environment where it's okay to fail, so it's safe to fail. So wouldn't it have been great for Warren Beatty to say, hey, everybody, I know we're in a rush here, but I've got to stop. I don't think this is the right card. No one would have remembered it, and it would have been a good one, Warren. Or the Deepwater Horizon. If one person had said, hey, hit that buzzer now, we would have never heard about that, the Deepwater Horizon. It just wouldn't have happened. So we need to fix the environment. And that is the organizational psychology. Again, this is Google Aristotle. It's not the people. If people are misbehaving, it's because the system is causing that behavior. It's never the people, 98% of the time. Don't just be good, get better. Carol Dweck, mindset. Again, Warren Beatty. He didn't want to look like a fool. He wanted to look good. A great leader always generates curiosity by saying, I don't know. We're all learning, especially in a complex environment. So we want to be in an environment where we're always continually improving, and then it's safe to fail and it's safe to be wrong, and then we just learn from that. And finally, act your way to new thinking, a bias to action. What practices can change the way we think? We can't think our way to new action. We've got to act our way to new thinking. So with that in mind, there's an old playbook and there's a new playbook. The old industrial age playbook is obey the clock. We want to control the clock. We want to feel safe to stop the clock. Coerce over collaborate. So instead of those binary questions, do what you're told, this is a process, these are the rules, which is comply over commit. We want to be able to collaborate and get people involved in the decision making and feel safe to stop or even break the rules if the rules are not applicable. Continue versus complete. So all of these are about switching between red work into blue work. So rather than just continuing on because this is the way we're going, feel safe to stop and say, let's think about what we're doing here. Is this still the right thing to do? Prove over improve, that's fixed over growth mindset, and conform over connect. That's just what we do here over how are we going to work together. So this is the new playbook. And what does this look like in practice? So here's some questions that you can use this afternoon. If you find yourself saying, does that make sense? Or right, or we're good here, or have you got everything you need? Instead, try what seems unclear. How could this be wrong? What are we missing? What else would you have? What do you see? What am I missing? How could I be wrong? Make it vulnerable, make it curious, make it demonstrate that just because you're the leader, you don't know everything. Those on the left will cause compliance. Those on the right will enable commitment. So are you sure? Is it safe? Will it work? Will that prediction be true? And so on. How confident are you? Use probability. How safe is this? How sure are you? If you say, are you sure? People will always say yes. Are you sure, project manager, we're going to be on time with this project? Yes, boss. I spent years doing that. Instead, how sure are you? Now you can say, well, actually, I'm sure 50%, but there's all these things that I'm not sure about. Now we're starting to generate communication and shared understanding. So with that being said, any questions? Or should I say, what questions do you have? Right, so, and finally, intent-based leadership, that's me. My name's Gareth Holebrook. I've got a LinkedIn profile. If you want to reach out to me, LinkedIn is the best place to do that. I will share some show notes on the Meetup channel with a link to, actually, I'll just quickly share this now. So I've got this PDF here, and it goes into more depth of all the different things we can talk about, how we shift between red and blue work. For those of you familiar with Scrum, by the way, the events in Scrum are the blue work. The work itself is the red work. There's all this stuff here. So with that being said, I'll stop my share.
Right.
Thank you for
We
your
already have a question.
time and attention today.
Gareth, that was amazing. And look, so wants to know, do you run any courses if we want to learn more?
Yeah, well, yes, we do. David came out in January, and I ran one with David, and I know a few people here today went to that. And then Peter Rushen, who's the CEO of Intent-Based Leadership International, based well, he's in Boston. He came from the UK. He came in March, and I've been doing some in-house training. I'm actually minded to do an online course, which is the remote equivalent of what I did with David. So if there's an appetite for that, I'd be willing to stand that up in the next few months, next few weeks, because I'm keen to share these ideas and see it become commonplace. And yes, I do. So there's a few clients here in New Zealand that I can only name one, which is the fire service. So in Nelson, I'm working with all of the station district commanders and station leads and how they operate as a fire service.
Okay, we have a vote for yes to remote training. That would be awesome. So
Thank you, Hina. Yes, I think I'm minded to organize that in the near future.
Fab. Okay, Catherine's also keen. What other questions do you have? So what's the biggest barrier you encounter with helping organizations shift to this type of leadership? Great question.
Yeah, so I've been successful with some organizations where I've gone in as an agile coach, and I've kind of by stealth Trojan horse saying, I do agile, but this is what I really want to do. I mean, the biggest example I think for me personally was I led the agile practice at Freedom, now Visa, and I used a lot of David's techniques and worked with the coaches there to stimulate some of it, but it was all under wraps. I think my biggest challenge is that crossing the chasm, that it's seen this big American thing, nuclear subs. Hey, New Zealand, we're not even nuclear free. So why does this mean? What does this matter for me? And a lot of the big players are saying, tell me an example somewhere else in New Zealand where this works. You've got big hedge funds in New York, but we're not New York. I think that's my challenge in New Zealand, and my focus is Australia, New Zealand, with a few clients in Singapore. So it's just people crossing the chasm. I think I'm looking for early adopters, and I'm looking to create a movement here in New Zealand. And ultimately, I want, by the way, a bit of a job offer here, but I'm looking for consultants to work with me, not in the next 3 months, but in the next few years. I would like to see probably 12 to 24 consultants in Australia and New Zealand working with me on this.
Brilliant. So non-leaders also need to change mindset towards leadership. Is this a challenge?
Yeah, great story. So Andy Warshak was a chief on David Marquet's Santa Fe on the ship. And then he moved to the next ship a few years later. And that captain was quite directive. And Andy, as a subordinate, used the ladder of leadership to climb up. So you can hack as a subordinate. I also, by the way, another objection to this is a lot of organizations say, yeah, we've got a leadership program, we don't need this. And it's problematic that this is leadership. It is leadership, but it's a specific practice which can sit alongside if you've got a formal leadership intervention, which everyone does, right? And I've forgotten what the question was. Sorry, Beth. What was that?
It's just, is this a challenge when it's, when it's a non-leader, right? Non-leaders also need to change the mindset. So, the
Yeah,
front and middle is what I look at that.
Yeah, and I think there's one or two people online I've seen who I've reported to in the past, and I think they would agree that I go to my leader and say, hey, this is what I see, this is what I'd like to do. You just give me the thumbs up, I'm going to do it. So as a subordinate, I use intent-based leadership. It's just an approach I've always done. Tell me if I'm wrong for those. But generally, and that's what I try and do when I coach teams. I encourage them to lean against their leaders, to push them to say, hey, I know you're busy with these decisions. These are the 3 options I see. This is what I think, and this is what I'd like to do. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, really good. It's the keys to the cultural operating model, right? Language. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
How does this interchange with situational leadership?
Great question. So when I hear situational leadership, I hear Goleman's kinetic leadership. So, are you affiliative, pace setter, directive? And actually, David says that there are times when it is appropriate to give instruction as a leader. So one would be a company policy. So one thing David said was, we're not going to use the word they on the Santa Fe. Now, that was a rule. Another time is when there's an emergency. So my wife's an emergency consultant doctor. She will just go, right, this is in respiratory arrest, get the crash cart. So there's sometimes it's legitimate to give orders, and you need to be self-aware when it is and when it isn't. So I blend Goleman's work together with Marquet's work, amongst other things. I think it is situational. And the thing about intent-based leadership is it's not about situation per se. It's about setting the environment over the long arc, that when a situation arises, that the right decisions get made. So, for example, on the Alfaro, that what the captain did to fail didn't fail during the voyage. What he could have done before they set to sea, to say, okay, I'm the captain, you're the crew. When I'm not here, this is what we can do. We've got the room key channel. If that storm gets any worse, these are the decisions that you're authorized to make. If you see anything, I'm not on the bridge, it's up to you to tell me what you see. So these are the things that the captain can say beforehand to set the environment. And so intent-based leadership is setting the environment. It's not about the situation per se.
Nice. This might be rhetorical, but Carl asks, how often does speaking truth to power work in NZ business?
Oh, you know what? I have somewhat of a reputation and David actually told me not to prick the ego of CEOs, because we say about psychological safety and not saying really aggressive things to workers. I get that. But CEOs, they're also human beings. They're also under threat, just like the captain on the El Faro. He had issues with his boss. And so I once said to a CEO, the executive are scared of you. You use coercive language. You're creating a very toxic environment. that was the end of my gig at that place. So I've been ejected I've been walked off premises before now. So I'm not great. I, though, stand by my position to be authentic. My delivery mechanism needs to improve. But I think we ought to try and speak truth to power. In one organization, I got a product owner to challenge the founder, because the founder at the last minute went to one of the developers and said, hey, that image is blurry, can you just shift it? And they completely crashed a sprint. And I got the product owner in front of the team to say, hey, boss, what you just did, that caused problems for the team. And I'd actually coached the CEO before and saying, this is how it's going to play out. And the CEO said, I'm sorry, from now on, if I ever go to you with a change and it's in your sprint, you have the authority to tell me no. And then they both came to me afterwards and thanked me, because I showed the model behavior where it's okay for a product owner to say no to the big boss. And it showed everyone else, look, he didn't get shot. So we need to model that behavior as leaders. But I think, yeah, speaking truth to power is hazardous. It's okay, I'm a consultant. My job is to try and get fired. But if you're not, I get it, it's not safe. But as leaders, we need to try and make it safe. So there are hacks to demonstrate that it's okay.
Nice. Yeah, we say don't call the baby ugly. Like, that's sort of our rule of thumb. Have you tried okay, sorry, Keith, I'm gonna read this. Have you tried the no, they, in organizations? One of my clients used it to de-silo the organization.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that question. Yes, I did. It was freedom. And
could you explain that a little bit? Because I'm unfamiliar with that. The no.
Okay, so this is when I go to meetings, I sniff out certain language patterns. And if I hear they in a meeting, or if I hear, for example, the CEO's Christian name being used, his first name being used a lot when he's not there, I know we've got an issue with decision making, but they can indicate that there's a boundary between us and them. So, for example, you go to a hotel and you're checking in and they say, sorry, we haven't finished your room yet. You know that that's a singular entity. If you hear the receptionist say, sorry, they haven't finished the room yet, you realize that the reception team and the cleaning team are two different teams. So there's a neuro-linguistic drive behind this. But what I did with Freedom is, for a bit of fun, for a day, we banned the word they. And every time any team said they in their meetings, they had to put it down on a little note. And then at the end of the day, we gave prizes to the day of the day. You had to wear a silly hard hat the next day, all that kind of fun. But it was a bit of fun. But the important thing is that leading up to it, people are coming up to me saying, wow, even before the no they day, I've just noticed how much times we say they. And as companies grow, this is just human nature. Once you hit that number of 150 people, you start to collect into smaller tribes, and then tribes start to distance one another. And how can we span those boundaries? And there's lots of techniques in Holacracy and Management 3.0 and Team of Teams, but just the simple effect of being conscious of when you say they, say we instead. And David talks on the Santa Fe. An engineer went to him and he said, look, the sonar's not ready. They haven't ordered this part. And he couldn't say they, and he went, we haven't ordered the part. All of a sudden, the engineer owns the problem. Yeah. So psychologically, it's really powerful. Sorry, somebody is chirping up then.
Keith wanted to chime in. Keith?
Yeah.
I'll just quick add, no, what was happening was when someone said they didn't do so-and-so, another team member would actually jump in and go, no, we didn't do so-and-so. And it had a very powerful effect.
It does. It's we. And I try, I mean, I don't get it right every time. I try and use we all the time. So even I heard Simon Sinek say this a few days ago. He doesn't go on stage and say, you need to fix yourself. You need to improve your leadership. He says, we need to improve our leadership, because I'm with you on this. We're in this together. And it causes like an alliance, an affiliation, rather than us and them. And I think in the world we live in at the moment, there's polarization in a lot of different domains. But in the workplace, we want to try and connect together. And that's the connection part of the new play.
Nice. It seems that developing trust between teams and leaders is foundational to having the conditions for intent-based leadership. Is this a fair comment?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. And how do we build trust? You have to, as a leader, show vulnerability, prove that you don't understand, prove that you care. And this is just through language patterns and behavior and consistency and authenticity. But it's an absence of trust. And this talks to Pat Lencioni and the 5 dysfunctions of a team. If you don't have trust, and you see this in teams, there won't be conflict. So you'll see that people actively avoid conflict, and then there will be lack of accountability. Well, they made the decision. I didn't agree with it, even though I didn't speak up. And because of that, there's an inattention to results. So I've worked a lot with Lencioni's work, and to build an effective team, we need to build trust. And I think amongst everything that an executive or a senior leader needs to do is to build trust within that organization. And I believe that can be achieved through language.
Agreed. Jeremy just has a comment here. I wonder how close to current state you start, or how much of an obvious step change kickstarts some of the momentum and curiosity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every organization is different that I've been to, but the patterns are very, very similar. At least here in Auckland, in New Zealand, you go to a different organization, and again, I'm biased, so I've got to be conscious of this, but I see the problem and go, you know what? This is the 4th bank I've been at, and you know what? The other 3 are just the same. But it's not because of the banking sector or the telco sector or New Zealand. It's because we're all primates. We're all driven by certain motivators to avoid these things and drawn towards these things. It's just how we're wired. And the construct of the workplace then drives us into certain behavior patterns, and we just need to optimize for the way we're wired. That's all it is.
Yep. And we're going to, just conscious of time, we have one last great question from Desiree. How can we use this challenge where how can we use this to challenge where command and control is a cultural norm in the actual country, has permeated into the way companies operate? So,
okay. So command and control, and actually it's interesting, the United States military, less so the UK military, tended towards, in the Vietnam War, using industrial age thinking, Taylorism, and driving everything from the Pentagon, centralizing decision making. So command and control, 1970s, 1960s. I think today, what we would describe as waterfall or command and control, I don't think is a million miles from. I mean, when I first left the Navy in '94, my first boss, ex-British Leyland, very directive, and I mean, it just wouldn't work these days. Just wouldn't work. So I think what we define as command and control, I think that center point, that window has shifted. But I have to say, I heard somebody say this the other day. I think there's a possibility that we're shifting back towards command and control, because of economic uncertainty and layoffs and what's happened in the last few years. I heard somebody, and I've forgotten who it was, made a comment that they're seeing more behavior in organizations which is more directive, and just do your job. I'm going to get fired if you don't. Well, in a restructure, just go away and do what you're told. I'm exaggerating, but you get the sentiment. I think, and that's a human nature thing. I think, and I'm the same, right? If I'm not perfect. I think all we can do is be aware of the impact of that and lean towards it. It's like fitness. If I stop training, I'm going to be unfit. I have to continually train every day. And you can't just say, well, I did an Ironman 2 years ago, so I'm fit now. No, I would have, if I didn't train, I would be 20 kg heavier. So you have to continually lean against it. And I think it's a continuum, and we're not there yet, but I have to say we're a lot better than we were 20 years ago.
Nice. Well, Gareth, thank you again so much. And thank you to everyone that joined on this beautiful, cold Friday morning. We appreciate it. And again, this recording will be up on our YouTube channel. Gareth will send out some show notes. But we do appreciate your time, and we will see you at the next one. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.